Hi, I'm Tom. This is my patio, and you're probably watching this because you're thinking of building a patio, and I made mine, so I want to show you it first. This is about 12 and a half by 19 feet, and it's made with small pavers, 8 by 8 inches and 4 by 8s. Made it in about 2 months and for under $3,000. And then in addition we have a walkway and steps up to the back door. Not a very big yard. Pine trees are right here with the lot line right behind it, but we wanted to dedicate a portion of our yard to having a nice patio. If you're like me, you are preparing to make your stone patio by watching lots of videos, and there are a lot of good ones out there that show you step by step how to build your patio. I would like to take a different approach and just go through all the different tools that I ended up using for the project. And you know, I'm sure every project is different tools. Some of these are homemade, and let's get started. So let's start. I'm going to go in order by how I ended up using them, and your first tool is your phone. Call your local digger's hotline and find out whether you have anything buried where you're planning to put your patio, because if there's buried cables, you got to change your plans. Next tool is a garden hose. Garden hose can be used for just laying out your patio design. Once you figure it out, you're going to want to measure, of course, using the tape measure. Tape measure comes in handy everywhere. You can't go without a tape measure. There's quite a few obvious tools here. The shovel, of course, you're going to be doing a lot of digging. I ended up using 3 different types. This thin, sharp spade was good for removing the sod. The pointed, rounded tip, I don't know what you call that type of shovel, is really good for just digging. And then, of course, the flat tip is good for moving stones around. It's probably the best. And then a wheelbarrow. Of course, you can see a lot of my tools are pretty old. This wheelbarrow, I don't know how old it is. Somebody actually abandoned it at a house that I moved into, but it still works great. You're going to use that for moving dirt around, moving materials around. It comes in super handy for this project. And then, of course, you want work gloves. I wore through 3 pair while working on the project. You can just see how beat up these are. This pair isn't actually worn through, but I kind of like these. They're extremely cheap. They're just dipped in latex, and like $2 a pair. They're pretty awesome. So like I said, there's a lot of obvious tools I'm using, but then I get to something like this. If you're not familiar with a Picmatics, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's just a long pick with a wide blade and a narrow blade, and it's great for going through roots. I think I might have shown you that I have a tree in my area. I also live in an area with lots of rocks and boulders in the ground, and this was just so helpful getting down into the ground. Yeah, you'll want one if you're digging through dirt with stones and roots. Then, of course, all the videos tell you to use stakes, some sort of string. I used twine, which I found was not the awesome cord to use, because it seemed to stretch throughout the day if it got hot or something, but it still ended up working. I just, tied a knot in it, and it tightened up. Then to help you with placing your twine, so the twine you use to set your height, I used it to set the actual top of the surface of the patio, and I measured down from that. So you can also plan your slope of your patio for drainage and get that into your twine or into your string. And to help you with setting your slope, you'll probably want a laser level. I've got a couple different kinds. The usual kind that I've seen in a lot of places. But I also had this gizmo that I thought, this is going to be cool because it actually tilts. Well, with two hands it tilts easily. But I found out it's kind of a prototype, and I found out it was out of calibration. So check your laser level, make sure it points horizontally like you want it, and then it's just very handy to set up your string in the right direction. You'll probably want some blocks and some shims to help you align it, get it in the right place. And this puppy, we bought this during the time of COVID when we were doing so many Zoom meetings. If you're going to be working in the evenings when it's starting to get dark, I found out that a ring light is the most awesome work light. This thing has 240 LED bulbs. It's dimmable, and it's got a tripod. It's got all these little gadgets for hooking up my phone and whatever. Yeah, it was about $75 though. Got it on sale though. It's just an awesome work light. So then, once you get your cord in, you want to dig down to a certain level, and I found it helpful to be using an actual meter stick, yardstick, that I could go from the cord, measure down easily and see what my depth was. But you can use a tape measure if you want. Digging down to the level you're supposed to hit is actually quite difficult, because I would take a load of dirt away in my wheelbarrow and then come back and wonder, where did I just dig? I found that if I measured a place and it was the right depth, I used some old spray paint and sprayed the bottom, and then I knew, okay, don't touch this again. The spray paint is also useful. I started in early spring when some of the plants were first coming up and I didn't see them. So it was handy for marking plants, so I wouldn't step on them when I was dumping my dirt. Next tool is just a knife, ordinary knife. You'll find that you use this lots of different times. I bought my materials in bags from the local big box store, and then I placed my bags around the area. When I was doing the base especially, I put being bitten by mosquitoes, I put the base materials throughout my pit, and then I went around with the knife and just slit every bag open, dumped it out, and that was a good way to just distribute it throughout the whole thing. If you are just using bulk materials that somebody dumps on your driveway, you probably find you'll use a knife anyway. The bow rake is good for moving stones around. You'll just use it for moving your stones, getting them level and everything like that. Speaking of level, ideally you'd want to use a 4-foot level, but I ended up I have multiple 2-foot levels. I didn't want to buy another one. I just used a long straight board and a 2-foot level to check my stone level. Now, I want to make sure you understand that the top layer of the stones is your most important step, getting that level, well, actually with your drainage taper. You want to make sure that is well compacted, it's the height you want, it has the slope, it's flat, because after that all you're doing is putting on 1 inch of sand and your blocks, which those are distances you really don't want to be changing much. So make sure your block, your base level is put in correctly. The next tool was a compactor. Of course, I don't have it in my string of tools here. I rented one. I ended up renting a mini compactor that's rated at 2,000 pounds. It was still extremely heavy. And I went and rented it when I was by myself. So I made myself this ramp to hook into the back of my minivan. I just used 5 2x4s. It's just connected with a 2x4 at both ends. I put a string on it and latched it into the back of the seat frames with a bungee cord. I was able to pull the compactor onto the ramp and down the ramp easily by myself. Not easily, still difficult. And then when I got to the concrete, I didn't want to drag it across the concrete. And I've talked about these tri-dollies in my piano moving video. These things are rated at like 300 pounds. I just used a couple of these, set the compactor on those, and moved it into the grass where I could drag it across the grass. These are pretty cool. I like those. Next, tools. So once you get your base in place, you're supposed to put in an edging. So the next tool is a hammer, because you have edging spikes, and this is leftover edging. I figured I'd just bring it out here. You put in spikes every couple of feet, and you have to hammer them in. So your tool is your hammer. I almost forgot to include my corner radius template. My patio has 3 corners that will have lawn around, and I wanted those to have a radiused corner, and I wanted them all to be the same. So I made a template out of cardboard and gave it a 2-foot radius, and then I used that as a guide for putting on my edging. And then when you're putting in the sand, you need these 1-inch PVC tubes so that you can lay a flat board across it and screed, I think that's the word, screed the sand flat. I started with 2 10-foot long pieces and realized that was overkill. I cut these down to about 5 or 4 feet, and that's plenty, because you only use the first 3 feet and then you start moving them. And then when you move them, you leave a hole behind. And I saw in somebody else's video he was using a trowel, and that's really handy for patching up that little blob spot left over by the PVC that you move. Next tool, I found that putty knives come in handy when you're laying the blocks. So let's say I have this entire row of blocks already in place, and I want to go around and make sure I have enough gap, proper gap. If you find gaps that are kind of wide and other ones that are kind of narrow, you can put a putty knife in and move, I don't know, quite a few blocks in that row around. It's just very handy. And if you have corners or any kind of angles or things like that, you probably need a saw blade with diamond edging. This is this is a diamond edge saw blade. I have a 7.5 inch circular saw. I just bought this, I don't know, it was pretty cheap. You'll need a place to cut your stones, and a way. So many of these videos showed people just laying the block down, and I found that my blocks slid all over the place. I couldn't do that. I had to clamp it down. But clamping is difficult because you have your saw wants to go along the side. So I ended up clamping on the sides, on the ends of my cut. And then to hold the clamp down, I couldn't just put a clamp here because the saw right here is starting here. So I ended up with this board, a clamp holding the board, kind of elaborate. And then my clamp wanted to spin, so I clamped another board to hold the clamp. It's pretty elaborate, but dang, it works. It's pretty nice. And then I put this table out here because there's just so much dust. And when you're sawing concrete, make sure you wear a mask and your safety glasses. So those are other tools you want to make sure you have handy, which I hope you do for other projects. Of course, you'll need a rubber mallet. That one is ancient. And then I couldn't get enough force out of a rubber mallet, so I made myself this homemade bonking tool, I'll just call it. It's just a 4x4, I don't know, 4 feet long. And you can get these rubber pavers. And I cut a strip off and just wrapped it around the top, duct taped it, and it worked really well. I could hammer on a block like right here to try to get it level, or you know, if it's high or something, I could pound it in and I could feel blocks moving 3 blocks away. It worked awesome. So I'm really happy I made that. You'll also want something like a leaf blower if you can get one. It's just, there were times when I live in a very woody area, just trees all over, maple trees, especially. When I was getting ready to put in my poly sand, the maple tree next door dumped probably 10,000 seeds on my patio. And I tried blowing them off. I was able to get rid of most of them. I also found that a thin little putty knife like this was needed to pluck those seeds out. It took a couple hours to do, and by the time I was done, it was time to quit. So I had a couple different tarps. I covered it with my tarps to keep those seeds off, so that I was ready to do my poly sand the next day. Unfortunately, it was also supposed to thunderstorm that day, but that was the day I was going to do poly sand anyway, so we used brooms, swept in the poly sand, a couple different brooms, and then we went back to the tarps and we, wet down. You're supposed to wet down the sand. We did that, and then we waited until it started looking like it was getting dark and put the tarps on to protect it from being washed out. And after all that work, it didn't rain anyway, so I took off the tarps and let it dry properly. Now, you're probably wondering why this duct tape is laying here. I noticed at the edge of my blocks, the poly sand slipped out of the end of the row. So I ended up going back and duct taping every edge, every end of the slot, and dumped a little poly sand in and sealed that area. It was time consuming, but I'm glad I did it because it looks a lot nicer. After all the poly sand was in, I built my patio, or my steps. Right now I've got a little set of mini steps for my dog. My dog is 15 years old and has problems with the steps, so I had leftover blocks and made him a little stepping area. So those are not bonded in place, but to bond them in place, I used some landscape adhesive. This stuff worked pretty well. I laid it down in the direction of the slope, thinking that if I do get water in there, any little thing I can do to help it escape is needed. So that's what I did. Lines going along the slope. After you're, well, I'll get back to this. So you need you'll need a caulk gun to put that in place. Then I sealed everything. Came back and sealed the patio with a sealant. I'm not showing the label because this isn't actually the jug I used. I used a sprayer and coated the whole patio. It took a day to dry, and they say you're not supposed to let it pool at all. I ended up with areas that were pooled, and they're probably the best sealed areas of the whole patio. The steps got a little slippery. It's a little bit dangerous if you're out here in your stocking feet, but I am glad I sealed it, because in the week between not sealing it and sealing it, I had my grill here and I blobbed a little bit of grease on the block, and I tried 4 times to use a grease remover, and it cleaned up a little bit, but still because of not being sealed, it just soaked it in. I've dripped grease since sealing it, and it just wipes right off. Then I went in. Then afterwards, I started thinking, well, I'm in southern Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, we get snow. The snow is going to melt and slip through the cracks of my patio, or my steps. And then it's going to freeze and break my patio apart. So I decided to put silicone in between all the cracks on the horizontal cracks. So I needed caulk. That was my last step, I think. Now you're seeing my computer screen. I would like to go over a few of the tools that I used for planning this patio. What you're seeing right now on the screen is just a simple 2D CAD image of my backyard. My house is basically, the back of the house is here. We've got this one room that sticks out in the back, and we were originally thinking about putting a deck on, and we couldn't decide this side or that side. Finally went for the side that our patio ended up on. Decks have, because you're attaching it to the house, there are various laws you have to follow, things like that. So I wanted to hire a contractor to do that work. When the quote came in, it was a little, quite a bit higher than what I wanted to pay. So I started investigating putting in the patio. My 2D view here, I added my maple tree, and we have a line of pine trees along the back, but they alternate back and forth like this. So this gave me a good idea for how much room I would have. My rocks, various rocks all over. So we ended up with a walkway, and then the deck was going to be here with a step down. But as you saw in some pictures, the patio is flat, essentially flat. So what I did in, gotta get my, after I drew this 2D image, I went to the big box store and just started wandering around, and I was looking at different materials. Before we switched over to the patio, I was looking at decking material, all the different types of railings, and the deck that's half polyurethane or whatever it is, PVC. And then I was looking at all the different stones, and my store has them laid out in all sorts of different patterns, so you can get an idea for what you're doing. They even list they even show you different ways of putting these patterns together on some of these displays. I was looking at, some of these you get pretty fancy, a lot of cutting involved. I didn't want to get involved with that much cutting. Not my idea of fun. I kind of like these big blocks. And then some of the displays they showed before and after sealing, and it changes the color significantly. I actually like the darker color, so that's a good thing because it's good to have it sealed. I was even, at a loss about how I was going to build my steps. So I was even looking at, do I use cinder blocks? Just all sorts of different, I pretty much took pictures of every block in the store. Then I went over to the piles of blocks, the raw materials, and I started picking up pieces and realized, I like the look of those big blocks, but they're dang heavy. I didn't want to deal with that. So, before you build this, think about, what kind of weight you want to be slinging around. I eventually said, okay, 12 by 12s, I can probably handle those. Do I like the look of these? I tried things out. And then I came upon these two colors here, and I said, oh, I kind of like that look, even though, just I don't see people's patios looking like that. And then I found they had the same colors. Doesn't look like it in this picture, but they had the same colors in the larger type. So this is an 8 by 8. I thought maybe I can make a pattern out of that. So I'll get back to that in a minute. My next tool that I wanted to show you is so now I've decided I'm going to build a patio. This is a 3D solid modeled image on a program called FreeCAD. FreeCAD is an open source program. You can download it for free. It is a solid modeling system, so it has a bit of a learning curve if you've never used 3D, but fortunately I've used some solid modeling systems at work. They're in the 8 to 10,000 or higher dollar range, and this one was free. So even though this does not have the power of those, I'm not complaining. I thought this was pretty awesome. The power of using 3D is I wanted to get my slope for drainage figured out, and I was able to do that. If you look at I'll get a straight on view. If you look at my patio from the edge, you can see that there's a slope here, and we'll look at it from the other direction too. You can see that it slopes. So my slope, my drainage actually starts in this corner as the highest point and drains down here. Same here, it drains away from the house, like you're supposed to do. This is my maple tree. We'll get rid of that. If I can find it, I'll get rid of that. Okay, good enough. So yeah, the advantage of using 3D is you can do your 3D, of course. Sort of babbling here. I kind of modeled the contour of my yard, so I knew what I was going to run into there. Just a couple key points gave me, what is the slope of my yard. And then, so with the slope in there, I was able to take some measurements. Now, a hint, if you do go this route, you can only measure 2 points, really. So what I ended up doing is I put in a little pocket feature. It cuts through this thing, gives me a whole bunch of different points to measure the slope from. So let me go into this. This line here, it goes all the way around. This is the bottom of the siding. I made an assumption that the builders kept the bottom of the siding level. So that was a really good point for me to use as my 0 point in all my measurements. So based on that, I was able to get some measurements from let's see if I can turn some on, from that siding down to some of these key points. that's a different distance. But anyway, so I was able to get the distance down. Seems to be off. This is another one. I've played with this model since. Anyway, so yeah, just thought I'd mention FreeCAD is pretty awesome. I've got my whole house layout modeled in FreeCAD, but this is a different model because this is my backyard. Oh yeah, and you can turn off different things. So since my porch wouldn't be there at the time, I was able to measure, down to the blocks. What's my next tool? Let's move on. Oh, I mentioned this is open source. I do have plans to put this whole video together using either Shotcut or OpenShot, which are also two open source video editing tools. So I'll let you know. Maybe I'll put some credit at the very end or something to let you know which tool I decide on. But those are also some open source video editors. Next, I go from the very difficult to use to the very simple. This is Microsoft Paint. It's just a simple, well, if you've used Paint before, you probably know this is very simple and you don't think of it as something you would design on, but I did. Because the solid modeler is not necessarily appropriate for putting blocks in. What I ended up doing is just throwing some blocks in to represent my 4x8s and 8x8s of the different colors. I created a block, a repeating pattern. I think it's about that big, and then I just copied it over, several times. I was able to take a copy of that big chunk, block it in, and this really, I put this together in maybe 5 minutes tops. And then I was able to take a count for how many squares of each color and size there would be. And it worked pretty well. I got to see how many blocks I'd have to cut. These, one thing that you need to be aware of is, even though your block size, the store may say it's a 4x8, put 6 or 8 of them together before you get started and just see how long that distance is. This is actually drawn based on the realistic lengths of putting the blocks together instead of the 4x4 and 8 dimension. I was able to fit a little bit more, and I opted not to put this one in. I didn't want to cut these lengthwise, but it ended up being almost exactly this size when I was done. So I was pretty happy with this. Moving on to the porch, this is my different layers of the porch, and building this in Paint was pretty decent too. So this gives me my size. I wanted a landing on the top that was at least whatever that ends up being, 24 inches wide, which is just the minimum. It's just the minimum of what you want for a landing. If I could go back and do it again, I'd make it just a little bit longer, but yeah, 24-inch landing on the top is about as small as you want to get it. Anyway, where am I going with this? So doing these different layers, if you look closely at this, you see that there's 4 inches and 4 inches in here. If you imagine this layer on top of that, it's 4 inches in and 4 inches in. You can see that all of these blocks overlap, in 2 directions. So that block is sitting right here. So using this technique, you can figure out, do I have enough overlapping spots so that this has some structure to it? It's not just vertical stacks of blocks. Next tool. Oh, and this is my pattern in real life. I think you saw that in the other pictures, but there it is. So as I was going along and thinking of things, I saved notes in a document. I was using Microsoft Word here. It's a very old version, but just, yeah, all of my information that I collected, I just kept in one document, so that I could go back and just reference things, change things. It was very handy to have, I could print out my page with all my dimensions for my slopes of blocks. I had my pattern here. I had pictures from the store's website, giving me the information on all the different types of blocks that I had decided on. You can see this color is supposed to be that color, but the image doesn't show it. I also recorded the skew. It was very handy to walk into the store and say, okay, I need 800 of skew, blah, 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 and 200 of skew, blah, blah, blah. And we put in my order in about 5 minutes. And then they said, okay, they'll be coming in about 2 weeks. So that was, if you can record information like that, prepare for when you need to put in your order. So that's my estimate. I kept estimates throughout the project planning period. Paver base, I bought them in bags. Leveling sand, same thing. Locking sand, figured out, they tell you how much you'll need for all the different area and depth that you're going. Edging, figured out what I need, and then the spikes to hold them. Here's my estimate beforehand. Also, I had some rental places figured out. I ended up going to one and realizing I should have reserved it, and I ended up going to the other one. They had the miniature compactor, and that was handy. I also had to remove some steps at the back door before I could even start my project. This step here was partially rotted, and I had put some other boards on top, so I knew it was time to remove it. I was a little concerned about this board back here. I ended up replacing it with a PVC board, just some other materials that I thought I might need for that part. I didn't know what I was getting into until I started peeling things apart. Then I also kept this section, I just called it extra information. All the notes that I had taken that I decided were obsolete, I didn't delete. I just moved them to the bottom of my notes, just so that I would, have a record of things I had considered, blocks that maybe I want to go back and use those instead. But anyway, these were some of the other ideas I had. And then as I was going, I recorded the dates on which I bought things. You can do it easily if you save the receipts. What I bought, cost, recorded all my costs throughout the project. This is my total for non-consumables, things that will stay with the house, that will change the, what's it called, the base of my home purchase, you could say, for tax purposes when I sell someday. These are the consumables, gloves, drop cloth, all the different things that I bought, the several pairs of gloves that I went through. And then other things I recorded. Chipmunks. I had a family of chipmunks living right next to my steps that I spent a lot of money trying different rodent-friendly methods of getting rid of them, and they refused to budge. I ended up buying this trap called the Jaws. Greatest rodent trap ever. Here it is. Ended up catching 9 chipmunks that lived in this chipmunk apartment building, you could say, and also 5 mice, I think. Just one night after another, I would set it and have something to get rid of. Sorry, this went morbid, but anyway, that's it for my planning tools and rodent removal tools. I hope this video helps you. Let me know. Hopefully I can allow comments in this video, and you can comment if you liked it or think I should have done something better. So anyway, good luck.